Is it rolling, Bob? So, I didn't really greet you people. I'm overwhelmed by this turnout. Thank you so much for coming. Shows the value of gratuitous self-promotion. I'll tell you more in a little while. I stand here on the steps of the Capitol, looking out at the people arrayed before me. My name is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and today I'm going to be inaugurated as President of the United States. I grew up tall, athletic, a bit aristocratic, articulate, with a good brain and a broad smile. It was a life of privilege, with private tutors, prepping at Groton, college at Harvard. My fifth cousin was President Theodore Roosevelt. My wife, Eleanor, is Teddy's niece. Like Teddy, I served previously as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Governor of New York, and I've run for Vice President. And in 1932, I had the great privilege of being elected President of the United States. I sired 6 children. But in 1921, at age 39, I was stricken by a dread disease that usually only affects children. I was felled by polio while on vacation with my family in Campobello Island in northern Maine. Despite my athletic upbringing, from that moment forward, my legs could no longer support my weight. Overnight, my life changed. I woke up one morning with intense pain and paralysis in my legs. For a time, I lost control of my hands and arms and my bowels and my bladder, but I recovered these functions. But I was never able to walk again without assistance. The onset of polio for me was accompanied by years of soul searching, trying to find my place in the world. Alcohol. But in 1926, I bought a warm water resort in Georgia, a couple of hours south of Atlanta, Warm Springs, and I spent months and months there. The warm waters were soothing to my aching legs. I was the most famous polio patient in the nation and possibly in the world. And when it became known that I was at Warm Springs, other polio patients flocked to Warm Springs. Despite my complete lack of medical training, I became known as Doc Roosevelt. I devised many methods of warm water therapies and exercises. After a time, I had to stop paying customers at Warm Springs because the healthy ones didn't want to share the warm pools with the polios, as they call them. Months and months I spent there at a time, months and months of therapy. When I was afflicted by polio, my mother's advice was to come to Hyde Park, where I'd grown up, and have her take care of me, to leave public life. Cripples, Franklin, should remain secluded. Seeing them makes other people feel uncomfortable. But eventually, I got back into public life. I returned to politics. I would often attend meetings and conventions, be wheeled in on my wheelchair, because I hated to be seen in a wheelchair or on crutches. I'd be wheeled in hours before the proceedings started, sit there as other people arrived, greeting them with a big smile and lots to say. Watch the proceedings, watch all the speakers, greet people as they left, and then sit there until the entire place was empty when I'd be wheeled out by someone with my wheelchair. I had a bladder of steel. News photographers and newsreel cameramen, by tacit agreement, never photographed me in my wheelchair or on crutches. Public arenas often installed ramps. I would campaign from the back of an open car. They would install ramps to allow my car exit and entrance, and often I would have to be carried because there were lots of places I couldn't get to on wheels. I'd have to be carried up stairs, sometimes several flights of stairs by burly men. Sometimes the only way in and out of a train car was through the window, and several men would hand me, hand over hand, through the windows of the car. This was all quite undignified, but in the end, highly effective for my return to public life. In 1928, I was elected governor of New York. In 1930, I was reelected, and in 1932, I had the great privilege to be elected President of the United States. Now I am here on the verge of my presidency, March 1933. Let me set the scene. The United States is mired in the depths of the Great Depression. Unemployment stands at 25% of the population. Hoovervilles, camps of tented camps of itinerant workers seeking employment anywhere in the country, people who wander from state to state and city to city. Hoovervilles dot the landscape. I want to use the resources of the United States government to put people back to work. I have a whole flock of agencies, a veritable alphabet soup that I'm planning. The WPA, the CCC, the TVA, all designed to put people back to work, to have the United States government hire them to do things that need to be done. I'm planning a program called Social Security, whereby any American, with the help of his or her government, can start to plan for retirement. Today I must give the speech of my life. I must inspire my countrymen. But I've always felt that a leader must walk to the podium and must stand there to deliver a speech. I need to give my people great confidence in me. Since Campobello, since 1921, I've been unable to walk in any normal way. But I've devised a method of ambulation that fools people. I'm helped to my feet. I wear steel braces at 15 pounds. I lean heavily on a cane with my right hand. With my left hand, I grasp desperately the strong right arm of my son Elliot or my son James. And we propel ourselves forward, always with big smiles, as if we have all the time in the world and we're happy to be there. We've practiced this for hours and hours and hours at a time. I've fallen many times in the course of the practice. And as we walk, I roll my torso. I have no control over my legs, but as I roll my torso, I'm able to lean on the cane, grab James's arm, and take 8 or 10 or 12 steps to the podium. And then I stand there. And now I'm here, on the steps of the Capitol of the United States, looking out at the people arrayed before me, on the steps and on the Capitol grounds and on the National Mall behind. And I say to them, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Thank you. The scariest thing about that is taking off my glasses and wearing a bow tie. About 20 years ago, around the end of the 20th century, my Aunt Evelyn and Uncle Saul had an extra ticket to a show. And they reached out to a group of recent Russian Jewish immigrants who they knew through their synagogue. And their friend in that community couldn't attend, but she sent a friend of hers, a man that my aunt and uncle didn't know. His name was Alex Levy. And my aunt and uncle picked him up. And on the way to the theater, they chatted, and he seemed like a nice enough fellow. Heavy accent. When they got to the theater, Alex looked at the program and he said, "What musical of Cole Porter is this? I know all his shows, but I don't know this one." And my aunt said, she explained that it was a review of songs from different Cole Porter shows. Not not an intact musical itself. But she was intrigued because she'd met a lot of Russians, and very few of them knew much about American culture, especially show tunes from the 30s. And she said, "Alex, how do you know about Cole Porter?" He said, "Oh, I come from a very musical family. My mother was a piano player." And she said, "Where did you grow up?" He said, "I grew up in Leningrad. But my mother came from a little village. You never heard of it. It's called Velizh." Well, just then the Cole Porter show started and they couldn't talk for a while. But my Aunt Evelyn and Uncle Saul were buzzing with excitement because they knew about Velizh. Because 100 years before, at the very beginning of the 20th century, 3 teenage girls from Velizh had emigrated to the United States. Their names were Anna, Bessa, and Chippa. Anna was my grandmother, Evelyn's mother. Anna, Bessa, and Chippa took a boat from Hamburg and they went to New York Harbor, and when they got there, they disembarked at Ellis Island. They were kept for several days there, questioned, their papers were challenged. And pretty soon they were admitted into the United States, and they went to Manhattan and Brooklyn where they had relatives and friends. And they married and had children and spent the rest of their lives in the United States and never returned to Russia. Now, for a long time, Anna, Bessa, and Chippa tried very hard to stay in touch with the family back in Velizh. They sent letters back there. They sent photos of their new life in New York. They had the family in Velizh wrote letters back. They sent photos of what was happening there. The New York family sent care packages, sometimes packaged goods or clothing, to the family in Velizh. And for a long time, they maintained a pretty good correspondence because what they left behind was a pretty good-sized family. Besides Anna, Bessa, and Chippa, there were 4 or 5 other siblings. The youngest was a piano prodigy named Sonia, and the mother of this brood was named Bella. And the father of all those children was a famous klezmer musician named Meyer, known as a musician and a great teacher of music. And because Meyer had red hair, he was known as Meyer de Geller. Now, eventually, the first part of the show ended, and during the intermission, Evelyn and Saul said to Alex, well, tell us more. Why did you grow up in Leningrad if your mother was from Velizh? He said, "Oh, my mother was a concert pianist, and she moved to Leningrad at a young age. And she went to the Conservatory of Music in Leningrad." And Saul and Evelyn looked at each other and they said, "What was your mother's name, Alex?" He said, "Oh, my mother's name was Sonia." And Evelyn said, "Alex, what was Sonia's mother's name?" He said, "Oh, my grandmother, she should rest in peace. Her name was Bella." And Saul said, what was Sonia's father's name?" "My grandfather, he was a great musician. His name was Meyer." And Evelyn and Saul both called out, "Meyer de Geller?" And they started to jump up and down. And Alex was very happy too, but he didn't really understand why. And Evelyn explained that she was also a grandchild of Meyer de Geller and Bella. And that she and Alex were first cousins. Now then the intermission ended, and the second part of the show started, and they couldn't talk for a while, but they were tremendously excited. And when the show ended, they got in the car and they went back to Alex's apartment and they met his wife, and they saw his photo album that he had inherited when his mother Sonia had died. And in the album were photographs that Evelyn could remember her mother bringing from Russia when she emigrated to the United States. And there were photographs of the New York family that had been sent back to Russia. Now, they tried to keep a correspondence going all through the 1920s, and in the 1930s, they remembered, they realized that things were not going well for the family in Velij. Things were going very badly. Jews were under intense scrutiny back then. One day they got a letter from a stranger, from a woman who said she was a friend of the family and that she was a Gentile. And she said, your family is under suspicion of being spies and subversives. You must stop sending them packages. You must stop sending them letters. Instead, send your packages and letters to me. I am not under scrutiny, and I will give them to your family back there. Well, this caused great consternation for the family in New York because they didn't want to lose contact with the family back in Velij, but they also didn't know if this was a trick, if this was in fact a woman, if she was telling the truth. And so they stopped sending packages, and the letters slowed down, and pretty soon they stopped. And that was the last anyone in the family had heard much about Velij until the middle of World War II. Nazi armies that had been occupying Velij one day rounded up all the Jews and locked them into several barns and set fire to the barns. And anyone who tried to escape was cut down by machine guns. And in 2 days, the German army managed to murder more than 1,400 people. Now, back to Alex. They'd made this tremendous revelation. They were excited to find out that they were cousins. They saw Alex's photo album. And the next few months were very exciting. Evelyn and Saul introduced Alex to other members of the family. A few months later, there was a family reunion in San Jose, and we found out that there were more cousins, more Russian cousins, more grandchildren of Bella and Meyer de Geller, who lived in Minnesota, also recent Russian immigrants. And they came out to San Jose for the family reunion. And so my dad and my Aunt Evelyn, his sister, sat at a table with several Russian cousins whose existence they hadn't even known about before just recently. A few weeks later, Evelyn and Saul were driving down Foothill Expressway. They lived in Los Altos Hills. Alex lived in Mountain View. And they passed each other on the road, and they waved, and they thought, isn't that interesting? And a few weeks later, they passed Alex on a different road. And they realized that in the 8 years that Alex had lived 5 miles away from them, they'd probably passed each other on the road several times and not known about it. Now my kids were trying to make sense of this, and my son Razi said, so Daddy, is this like if Danny and I didn't see each other for a long time, and then we did? And I said, no, what this is like is if you and your brother, God forbid, sadly, never saw each other for the rest of your lives, and then 100 years later, on the other side of the world, your children met and discovered they were family. That's what this is like. Thank you. Thank you. Not a light story. I've been blessed to have a lot of friends. Working on film crews is always a very bonding experience, and I've met people. I have a lot of good friends in the Bay Area who I worked with for years. And because I was able to travel, I worked with all over the U.S. and really all over the world, and made a lot of wonderful friends there. Some years back, I was hired by a production company to do a video shoot up on the Clavey River, a wild and scenic river up in the Gold Country, in the Sierra foothills. And I drove up there and I discovered that the plan was for a helicopter to take me and a guy named Hank, I'll call him Hank, and a couple of search and rescue guys, and I was going to say drop us, but set us down in a place on the Clavey River that was inaccessible by foot. And we were just supposed to set up our video equipment and document the levels of the river. It was kind of a video environmental impact report. Document the levels of the river and the canyons and the flow of the river through the Clavey River Canyon. And the helicopter took us and set us down, and the search and rescue guys were not part of the crew. They were just there to make sure we didn't drown. and I got to working with this fellow, Hank, and I discovered that my first day on that job, was Hank's second day on the job, second day in the film business ever. He was completely inexperienced. He kind of knew what a camera was, but that was about it. But he had a great attitude and a good work ethic, and he was sharp and clever. And we had a great time working together, and very quickly he had figured out how to set up the tripod, how to mount the camera, how to plug in the video recorder, how to push the go button, how to break it down and move. So we got great shots of the river. It was a beautiful day, glorious day. And we got wonderful shots of the river. And then we broke down our equipment and we walked further downstream along the riverbank. And we got more shots. And then we walked further downstream, had lunch, did some more shooting. And it was really a glorious time. It was so beautiful. And so we were working, but it was very relaxing. There was no client there to tell us what to do. And at the end of the day, the helicopter picked us up and brought us back to Jamestown Airport, where we'd left from. And as I was wrapping my equipment, wrapping the camera and video recorder, Hank walked up to me, and he handed me a big fatty, a nice big fat joint. I said, "Oh, well, this will make the ride back to the Bay Area a lot more interesting. Where'd this come from?" He said, "Well, it comes from a garden patch that I tend." I said, "Garden patch, huh?" I said, "There are a lot of garden patches like that around here?" He said, "Bill, there are dozens of them. They're all over the place. Why do you think they call it the gold country?" He looked at me and he said, "So what part of the Bay Area you come from?" I said, I live in Albany. It's a little town on the north side of Berkeley." He said, "Oh, I know all about Albany. I'm moving there in a couple of weeks." I said, "You're moving to Albany? It's a tiny place." He said, "Yeah, my wife's been accepted into the law school at UC Berkeley. And the two of us and our two boys are moving into married student housing in Albany." Well, the married student housing is about a half a mile from my house. And I looked at him and I said, "So what are you going to do when you move to the Bay Area?" "Well, my brother-in-law is a contractor. He lives in Fremont. I guess I could go pound nails for him for a while." And he looked at the camera and wrapping. He said, "But hey, this sure looks like a fun business." And that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship that's lasted for many, many, many years. Hank did move to the Bay Area, and I gave him the names of some producer friends of mine. And he contacted them, and very quickly, through diligence and hard work and a certain amount of pushiness and name dropping. "Oh, I work with Bill Zarski a lot." He quickly established himself as a freelance film worker, mostly working in the lighting and grip departments. Now, a lot of our work was in Silicon Valley. And so over the next 10 or 12 years, Hank and I spent a lot of time in the car, hours and hours and hours going back and forth. We rarely stayed down there. Sometimes we'd drive an hour and a half to get to work, sometimes even 2 hours, and then home in the evening, and then up early the next day and back. And in the course of all those hours in the car, we would talk about everything. We'd talk about women and relationships and families and kids and, you bet, sports and politics and everything, the kinds of things that you talk to your good friends about. And after a while, we realized we had a good friendship going. When Hank wasn't working on film jobs, he would sometimes go, as he said, up the hill to Tuolumne and Calaveras counties and tend some of the garden patches that he told me about. And so often when we were driving back from the valley, there was some kind of herbal treat to spice up our don't tell my wife. Now, after a while, and some years later, Hank bought land up in Mendocino County, and he moved up there. Beautiful 40 acres of redwood and pine forest, and he cleared a bunch of the land and built a house. And when my wife and I went up there the following year, we weren't surprised to see about a dozen pot plants in a fenced-in enclosure near the house. When we went back the following year, there were more plants in a sunny ravine near a creek down below the house. And the following year, there was another garden patch, and there were even more plants there, another pot patch. Now, a few years ago, Hank and his partners bought a medical cannabis dispensary in Mendocino County. They sell a lot of different strains and varieties of pot, but there are two main kinds. One of them is high in THCs, tetrahydrocannabinol compounds, which are the things that get you high, the intoxicants. But some of them are very low and non-intoxicating, but they're high in CBDs, which are the cannabinoid compounds, which anecdotally shrink tumors and help conquer epilepsy and help people relax and sleep. There's just beginning to be actual medical research about this. And Hank called me up one day and he said, "Hey, how'd you like to come up here and take pictures of the garden?" I said, "Sure. That sounds like fun." I said, "But you know, you're there year in, year out, every dawn, every dusk. You're there for the pretty light. Why don't you take pictures of the garden on your phone?" And he said, "Well, I do. I've got a lot of garden pictures." And they needed a new website, and I ended up designing the website for the dispensary. He said, "But what I really want for the website are shots of the buds of the plants." Now, I didn't know that much about the plants, but Hank and I in the car had talked a lot about horticulture. And he's really a great farmer. He knows a lot about drip irrigation and growing things in bags and nutrients and how to raise plants and how to prune them. And he wanted shots of the buds. I remembered pot buds from when I used to buy little bags of pot, and we smoked the leaves, and then there was this kind of crusty, dried up part that turned out to be the bud. When I went up there, we went into the garden, and the buds were sometimes 6 inches, 12 inches, literally 2 feet high. The bud is full of pollen, and it's the most potent part of the plant. And that's what he wanted pictures of. And we had a glorious day in the sun working, and he had several dozen different strains of cannabis. And we worked our way through one garden from one end to the other. It was a beautiful day in the middle of this gorgeous setting. And we worked our way through the next garden, and the aroma, oh my God. Notes of chocolate and wild cherry. Frisky and naive, but with a good nose and a smooth finish. People use the same kinds of dopey terminology about pot strains that they do about wine vintages. Kind of drives me crazy. And we moved through several different pot patches, and we had a great time. And it was kind of like being down on the river the day we met. It was kind of like, it was very similar. We're setting up our gear, we're getting shots, we're moving down, we're moving from one place to another in a very definite direction. And Hank, as I said, is a terrific farmer. His plants are 10 or 12 feet tall. They're trees. And even though he plants them pretty far apart, the leaves, the branches all reach out and touch. And they're in rows, but sometimes the branches reach across the road. We had to kind of push our way through them to get from place to place. But as I said, it was a glorious day, and we had a great time. It was really fun to be with my buddy again. We talked about his kids and what was going on with them. We talked about sports, we talked about the Giants, we talked about everything. We had a great time, and at the end of the day, I said goodbye and I headed out because I had to be home that night. And I was hungry, and I stopped at a barbecue place that I'd been to with Hank before. And when I walked in, I felt like every head turned toward me. People were smiling, and I felt like I just walked into a comedy club right after somebody had told a really terrific joke, and the laughter had just died down, but everybody was still very happy about whatever the joke was that I wasn't in on. And I sat down and ordered food, and the waitress was kind of smirking at me. She brought my food, and at the next table there was a hippie couple with a baby, and they were all staring at me and smiling. And it was really creepy. And so I got up, I slurped down my iced tea, and I scarfed down my pulled pork, and I got out of there as fast as I could. I drove home. A couple of days later, I called Hank and I said, "Hey, the pictures turned out great. You won't believe the shots of the buds. They're amazing. Some of the most effective ones are when he put his hand into the frame so we could see just how, is this bud 6 inches long or 12, 24 inches long? And they really look great." And I said, "And also, this weird thing happened on the way home." He said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, I stopped at Hamburger Ranch, the name of this barbecue place. It's on where 128 hits 101 in Cloverdale. It's a great place." Right. Great. Been there, right. I stopped at Hamburger Ranch. And when I walked in, it was like everybody was laughing, and I didn't feel like they were laughing at me, but I had no idea what they were laughing at, what was making everybody so happy. And I sat down, and it felt like everybody was staring at me. There was a silence. He said, Well, Bill, you probably smelled like a cannabis patch. I've always had a terrible sense of smell, and I could smell 100 pot plants when I was in the middle of them, but I couldn't smell my clothing. He said, yeah, you know, when I go out in public, after working in the garden, I change all my clothes, including my underwear. I shower, I wash my hair 3 times, and I rub olive oil on my forearms. He said, but you went right from the garden to the restaurant, didn't you? Then I had a thought. I said, hey, I haven't washed those clothes yet. They're still in the hamper. And he said, well, Bill, I don't know what you have in mind, but I do not recommend smoking your jeans. Good advice. That's what friends are for. So we're coming to the part of the program that you've all been looking forward to, which is the end of the program. No. And I want to just thank several people here and acknowledge several people. First and always, my wonderful family, my wife Susan and son Danny, who helped us set up. My friends Jennifer Chinlin and Judy Brown, who also helped organize and put up this lovely Terry Stokes from the Storytelling Association of California. His assistance with planning and setup and his quick responses to my panicky emails. My good friend, writing teacher and mentor Larry Habiger. Jeff Greenwald, who had to leave to go to another event, but who's a wonderful travel writer and storyteller, who's been a great inspiration to me. And he has a one-man show called Strange Travel Suggestions that I've seen 3 or 4 times, and he's a magnificent storyteller, and I'm really pleased that he came tonight. So Jeff Greenwald, the empty chair. The staff and faculty at Stagebridge in Oakland, where I've taken storytelling classes the last couple of years, especially my dear friend and mentor, Mary Gay Ducey. And I have to give you one plea. Stagebridge is what, a senior performance theater? I've never done anything with senior in the title before. I said, but it's a wonderful place and there are performance classes in all different areas. And Stagebridge is in a lot of financial trouble. And if you like this show and you like this kind of stuff, please go on the net to stagebridge.org, all one word, stagebridge.org, and make a donation. They really need the money. They may have to close down. It's been around for 40 years. And they may have to close down. So if you can do that, stagebridge.org and make a donation and open your hearts, please. And if you can, take a class.
Yes.
The other thing I want to do is, those of you who know me as a writer know that I've done a lot of book readings. And one thing I like to do is to do a book giveaway. And sometimes we do a raffle. And sometimes I give a book away to the person who's come the greatest distance. And assuming that I would have family and friends coming from Tokyo and London and Arizona and Seattle, I thought, I'll do that. But Vladimir Putin couldn't make it here tonight. And so I decided to change that, and instead of that, I'm going to give the book away to the person who came the shortest distance. And that's Ben Tucker, who lives around the corner. Happy birthday. Valuable prize. Oh, that's mine. That's for FDR's glasses. Thank you.
FDR's glasses.
I graduated from Dartmouth College in northern New England at the height of the Vietnam War. And in order to avoid an all expenses paid trip to Saigon and Hanoi, courtesy of Uncle Sam, I opted to stay in that area for a couple of years and teach high school. Several of my friends were in the same boat. None of us really wanted to be teachers, but it seemed like the best thing to do at the time. Now, 4 of us rented a house. A house set way off in the woods, up a dirt road, up another dirt road. Beautiful house set on 80 acres of rolling Vermont farmland. It had been a farm, but it was not a working farm when we had it. The house belonged to a family that lived on Guam, on the island of Guam. And they used the house in Vermont as a summer house. It was fully winterized, but they were only there for a month or 2 in the summer. And they wanted someone, they had some break-ins, and they wanted someone to live there year-round. And the other thing they'd done for security was that they had installed a big blue urban street light on a tall aluminum pole over the property. It put light all over the property. It went on every day at dusk and went off every day at dawn. And you could see it from quite a distance away. Now, the 4 of us rented the house, and when we got there in late summer, it was beautiful and verdant, and the creeks were running, and it was warm and beautiful. But it was way out in the middle of nowhere. We knew nobody around there. We had no social life. One of the 4 of us had a girlfriend in Boston he saw occasionally. The other 3 of us made friends with loneliness. Now, as the fall came on, when it got to September, it started to get cold, and we had to realize we had to start to bundle up. And we wore more and more clothing, and in the course of September, the leaves started to turn. And by early October, it was peak foliage weekend, and the hills were covered with gold and yellow and brown and glorious red leaves. The sugar maples were all very red. And it was absolutely beautiful. But inevitably, it got colder and colder and colder. And those beautiful leaves withered up and they died and they fell from the trees. And then we had bare tree season, which lasted for a few weeks, probably the bleakest time of year. Cold, no foliage, no snow. Bare tree season is followed by snow and freaking cold season, which lasts for months and months and months. Now, one day in the middle of the night, in the middle of the winter, the 4 of us in the house decided it would be a good idea if we went for a walk. It was 2 o'clock in the morning and 10 degrees below zero. When we went outside, it was an amazing scene. It was unbelievably cold, but the moon was out, a glorious full moon. And the snow was coming down in enormous flakes. It was coming down and coming down. And on the ground, there was crusty old snow, and then it was topped by new powder. And it was absolutely beautiful. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in that kind of intense cold, but what happens is, when you walk outside, the snot in your nose freezes immediately. If you have a beard, you get a muzzle full of ice. If you're a guy and you pee outside, it freezes in a glorious arc before it ever hits the ground. And if you follow a dog around and watch them take a crap, it sits there steaming for a long time. Unbelievable. Now, we thought it would be fun we had an old football, and we thought it would be fun to kind of throw it around. But it stung our hands, and after a while we abandoned that. And we decided, let's go for a walk in the valley down below the house. And so we got down there, and I just had to put on more clothing because I was so cold. When we got down there, I started to walk away from my roommates, and I separated from them. Got my gloves on, had 2 hats on, scarves, and I was still freezing. And I walked away from them, and I started to march and march and march, and I lost all sense of time, because what you have to understand here is that we were all intoxicated. 2 a.m., 10 below. And I don't remember how it was, whether it was pot or one of the hallucinogens that we favored back in those days, or alcohol, or probably some combination of those. But I was high, and I just started marching and marching and marching, and I didn't really care where they were, and I walked and walked. And in my mind's eye, I was Dr. Zhivago. I was Yuri Zhivago, tramping across the steppes of Russia, across the plains of Siberia, on my way home, on my way back to see Lara, the love of my life, who's waiting for me in Moscow or St. Petersburg or somewhere like that. Go, Yuri, go. Lara will wait for you. Even though in the back of my mind, I was still aware that the real love of my life had dumped me unceremoniously just a few months before. Go, Yuri, go. Lara will wait for you. And I walked and walked and walked. And it was glorious. The sun was coming down. The snow was coming down. Enormous flakes. The moon made it all glisten. The snow on the ground was beautiful and white. And I walked behind a stand of trees in the shadow of the moonlight. And when I reemerged into the beautiful glistening snow, I looked around me, and the snow coming down and the snow on the ground all merged. And I realized I was lost in a total whiteout. I couldn't see the horizon in any direction, and I had no idea where I was. I mean, I thought I was Yuri Zhivago, and I was just marching, trying to get to the next Siberian village before I freeze to death. My sense of time had wobbled precariously, and at a certain point I thought, I've been walking for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I still haven't frozen to death. I must get to the next village. And I had a moment of panic. And then I heard voices. Z, we're going inside. Who could that be? I looked around, and then I looked back 180 degrees behind me, and I saw 3 figures on the horizon. I could barely make out the horizon now. And I decided I should go in their direction, and I walked, and I realized quickly I was slipping, and that there was ice directly under me, and I started to panic again, because I was afraid I would fall through the ice into the creek, into the freezing water below the creek, and no one would find me for months. Of course, it was 10 degrees below zero. The creek was frozen solid, but I was a city boy. What did I know? And I started to walk again, and I saw the 3 figures just disappearing into the whiteout. And beyond them, I saw a house. And above it, the moon starting to set. And I thought, that's our house in Vermont. I'm not in Siberia. I'm really losing it. And I was tired of the cold. And I was tired of the snow. And I was tired of the isolation. I needed a profession. I was tired of teaching. I needed a soulmate. I needed a girlfriend. I needed to have a relationship. I needed a social life. It was time to get out of town. I'd been accepted in the film program at Stanford. California, here I come. Right where I'll start over from. I trudged back to the house. I walked in after my roommates. I looked at the clock, and it turned out in the weeks I'd been walking across Siberia, 13 minutes had elapsed. I went back outside to look at the moon, and I thought, that's not the moon, it's the freaking streetlight. It was time to make my escape. Thank you. That's every story I know.